When the full moon rises, something ancient stirs in the dark, a fear we pretend to forget, but never truly do. Werewolf stories aren't just about monsters, they're about losing control, crossing a line you can't come back from. Tonight, we're stepping into shadowy forests, cursed bloodlines, and midnight transformations that defined classic horror. If you love that slow, creeping dread that stays with you long after the screen fades to black, you're in the right place. Like the video, share it with fellow horror fans, and subscribe for more unforgettable journeys into classic terror. 1. The Wolfman, 1941. A single bite under a glowing full moon turns an ordinary man into a prisoner of his own shadow, and asks you one chilling question. What would you do if the monster was you? There's a reason The Wolfman, 1941, still whispers its curse across generations. This isn't just the story of fangs and claws, it's the slow, aching tragedy of a man who knows what's coming and can't stop it. From the very first moments, the film feels like a campfire tale told too close to midnight. When logic fades and superstition starts to sound dangerously real, you can almost feel the weight of the moonlight pressing down, as if it's watching, waiting. Lon Chaney Jr.'s Lawrence Talbot doesn't charge into darkness like a fearless hero. He hesitates, he doubts, he hopes he's wrong. That's what makes this film sink its teeth into you. Each transformation feels less like spectacle and more like a quiet funeral for the man he used to be. As you watch, you might catch yourself leaning forward, silently wishing the curse could somehow be broken, even though you know it won't. Have you ever rooted for a character you knew was doomed from the start? What truly lingers isn't the werewolf's snarl, but the sorrow in Talbot's eyes, the fear of hurting those he loves, the unbearable loneliness of knowing no one can truly understand what's happening to him. This is horror born from empathy, not shock. The foggy forests, the echoing footsteps, the haunting rhyme about the moon, they all feel like pieces of an old nightmare you've half remembered since childhood. And then there's the curse itself, simple, poetic, and terrifying. One bite, one moon, no escape. It taps into a universal fear, the idea that one moment, one mistake, can change you forever. Watching this film today, you might ask yourself, is the real horror the beast, or the loss of control over who you are? Even decades later, The Wolf Man doesn't feel outdated, it feels eternal. It reminds us that classic horror didn't need excess blood or noise to be powerful. Sometimes, all it needed was a man, a moon, and a fate he couldn't outrun. So tell me, do you see The Wolf Man as a monster movie? Or a tragic love letter to lost humanity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how this classic made you feel. 2. Werewolf of London, 1935. A single night in the misty streets of London proves that the most dangerous monsters don't always howl. Sometimes they walk calmly beside you. Would you notice before it's too late? Werewolf of London doesn't rush to bare its fangs. Instead, it draws you in slowly, like a strange conversation you can't quite leave. From the first moments, the film feels unsettling in a quiet, polite way. The kind of horror that smiles at you, offers tea, and hides its curse behind good manners. That's what makes it linger. This isn't the savage werewolf of folklore, this is a thinking man's nightmare. Dr. Wilfred Glendon isn't cursed because he's reckless, he's cursed because he's curious. And haven't we all been there? Watching him, you might feel an uncomfortable familiarity. His obsession with rare plants, his belief that knowledge can control nature, slowly turns against him. The transformation here isn't explosive or loud. It creeps in, one doubt at a time. You can almost hear his thoughts racing as the moon draws closer. Asking the same question you might be asking yourself. Can intelligence save you from something ancient and unstoppable? London itself becomes a character, fog curling around street lamps, shadows stretching just a bit too far, footsteps echoing when no one should be there. The city feels alive, but not welcoming. There's a sense that something is watching from the corners, patient and unmoved by human logic. As Glendon struggles to maintain control, the tension doesn't come from what he does, it comes from what he's trying desperately not to do. What makes this film truly haunting is its restraint. Violence is suggested, not celebrated. Fear lives in glances, pauses, and in spoken realizations. You're invited to lean in, to imagine the worst rather than see it outright. And when the curse tightens its grip, the tragedy feels earned. You don't just witness a downfall, you feel the weight of inevitability pressing down. Minute by minute. Watching Werewolf of London today, you might be surprised by how modern it feels in its themes. Control versus instinct, science versus superstition, pride versus humility. It asks a quiet but powerful question: if you knew you were becoming something dangerous, how far would you go to hide it from the people you love? Now I'm curious, do you find this subtle, psychological approach more frightening than brutal transformations? Or do you prefer your werewolves wild and unchained? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective adds another shadow to this story. 3. The Wolfman, 2010. A return home under dark clouds awakens an old family curse. But what if the real horror isn't the beast outside, but the blood that binds you to it? From the very first frame, The Wolfman, 2010, feels like a ghost story whispered through fog and candlelight. This isn't a fast, modern thrill ride, it's a slow descent into something rotten and inherited. As Lawrence Talbot returns to his childhood home, you can sense it immediately. The past isn't dead here. It's watching, breathing, waiting for the moon to rise. And you might catch yourself wondering, would you have come back, knowing some doors are better left closed? Benicio del Toro's Talbot carries his fear quietly, like a weight he's learned to live with. He doesn't chase answers with confidence, he drifts toward them, pulled by grief and guilt. Every corridor in the Talbot estate feels like a memory that refuses to fade. Portraits stare too long, shadows linger where no one stands. The house itself seems to remember things its inhabitants want to forget. As a viewer, you're invited not just to watch, but to step inside, to feel that unease settle into your chest. When the curse finally reveals itself, it's brutal, but never empty. The transformation isn't just about torn flesh and broken bones, it's about surrender. The film asks a painful question without ever saying it out loud: how much of who we are is choice? And how much is inheritance? Watching Talbot fight the change feels like watching someone struggle against their own reflection. Have you ever feared becoming something you saw in your parents? What sets this version apart is its tragic elegance. The violence is savage, yes, but it's wrapped in sorrow. Every howl sounds like a scream for help that no one can answer. Anthony Hopkins' presence adds another layer of dread, turning family into fate and love into manipulation. The closer Talbot gets to the truth, the more you sense that survival might not mean victory. Even the moonlight feels cruel here, beautiful, silver, and merciless. It doesn't just reveal the monster, it exposes the lies people tell themselves to keep going. By the time the final confrontation arrives, you're no longer asking who will win. You're asking whether anyone can truly escape what they are. So tell me, do you see The Wolfman, 2010, as a monster movie? Or a gothic tragedy about blood and destiny? And if you were faced with a curse written into your family history, would you fight it? Or accept it? Share your thoughts below. I'm listening. 4. Wolfen, 1981. A city begins to bleed in silence. And the predators aren't hiding in the forest. They're already watching you from the shadows of the streets. Would you feel safer knowing that? Wolfen doesn't howl at the moon. It listens. It stalks. It waits. From the opening moments, the film pulls you into a New York that feels wounded and forgotten, abandoned buildings like broken teeth, empty streets humming with unease. This isn't a werewolf story rooted in folklore and candles. This is urban horror, where concrete replaces trees and the darkness feels uncomfortably close to home. As a viewer, you're not invited to relax, you're invited to look over your shoulder. Detective Dewey Wilson walks into this nightmare already carrying scars. And that matters. He doesn't chase the truth with bravado, he follows it reluctantly. As if some part of him knows it won't end well. The killings don't feel random, they feel deliberate, almost ritualistic. And slowly, a terrifying idea begins to take shape. What if the city itself has teeth? Have you ever felt like a place was watching you, judging whether you belong? What makes Wolfen so unsettling is how it shifts your perspective. The monsters here aren't just creatures, they're guardians, executioners, spirits tied to land and memory. The film asks you to question who the real intruders are. Is it the unseen hunters moving through the ruins, or the people who built, abandoned, and forgot them? As the mystery deepens, you might catch yourself feeling conflicted, uneasy, yet strangely understanding. The sound design alone feels like a heartbeat under the pavement. Growls echo from nowhere, footsteps come from impossible angles, and silence stretches just long enough to make your skin crawl. When the film allows you to glimpse the world through the predator's eyes, it's not thrilling, it's alien. You're reminded that humans are no longer the center of the story. And that realization hits hard. Unlike traditional werewolf tales about personal curses, Wolfen expands the fear outward. This isn't about one man losing control, it's about an entire society losing its connection to the land beneath it. Watching it now, the themes feel eerily modern. Gentrification, displacement, forgotten communities, all wrapped in a cloak of supernatural dread. Horror becomes a warning, not just entertainment. By the time the truth is revealed, you may find yourself asking an uncomfortable question. If something ancient rose to protect what we destroyed, would it be the villain, or the consequence? That's the power of Wolfen. It doesn't just scare you, it challenges you. So tell me, did Wolfen make you fear the monster, or fear the city itself? And do you think humanity would survive if nature finally decided to fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is one story that deserves discussion. 5. Silver Bullet, 1985, in a quiet small town where everyone knows your name. Something begins hunting at night, and the most terrifying part is realizing it could be someone you trust. Who would you suspect first? There's a certain kind of fear that only exists in small towns. And Silver Bullet understands it perfectly. This isn't the fear of dark alleys or distant cities, it's the fear of familiar streets, friendly waves, and doors that were never locked before. From the moment the killings begin, the town feels like it's holding its breath, pretending everything is fine, and as a viewer, you're invited to share that denial. After all, monsters don't live here, right? At the heart of the story is Marty, a boy who sees more than adults are willing to admit. Watching through his eyes changes everything. The terror isn't loud or flashy, it's personal. Fireworks explode in the sky, laughter fills the air, and somewhere nearby, something is watching patiently. The contrast is unsettling. You might find yourself thinking back to your own childhood, the way nights felt longer, shadows deeper, and adults strangely unaware. Did you ever feel like you knew something was wrong, but no one believed you? The werewolf in Silver Bullet isn't just a creature, it's a presence. It moves through cornfields, backyards, and church steps, leaving behind fear that spreads faster than the truth. What makes this film so gripping is the paranoia it builds. Every character feels suspicious. Every smile feels slightly off. The town starts to turn inward, hunting for answers while quietly fearing what those answers might reveal. And that question keeps circling. What if the monster isn't a stranger? Gary Busey's eccentric, warm-hearted uncle adds a pulse of humanity to the story, humor mixed with quiet sadness. His belief in Marty feels like a lifeline in a world where adults would rather cling to normalcy than face horror. The bond between them becomes the emotional anchor, reminding us that courage often comes from connection, not strength. As the tension grows, you don't just want the monster stopped, you want the family protected. The werewolf itself feels raw and vicious, but the real dread comes from anticipation. Footsteps in the dark, a window left open, a sound that shouldn't be there. Silver Bullet knows how to make you wait, and waiting is where fear grows strongest. By the time Silver finally enters the story, it feels earned, almost mythic. Watching Silver Bullet today, its themes hit just as hard. Blind faith, denial, and the danger of trusting appearances feel timeless. It asks a question that lingers long after the credits roll. If evil wore a familiar face, would you see it, or refuse to look? So let me ask you, does Silver Bullet scare you more as a monster movie, or as a story about a town afraid of the truth? And if you lived there, would you listen to the warnings, or keep pretending everything was normal? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious where you stand. 6. Bad Moon, 1996. When the monster isn't stalking the town but living under the same roof. How long could you pretend everything is normal, and who would you believe when instincts start screaming? Bad Moon opens with a sense of quiet unease that never really leaves. This isn't a story that rushes toward chaos, it lets dread seep in slowly. Like a stain you can't scrub away. At first, things seem almost peaceful, a remote house, familiar faces, a chance to start over. But something feels wrong, and you feel it before you can explain it. That's the film's first trick. It makes you uneasy without telling you why. The real genius of Bad Moon lies in its perspective. Much of the tension is filtered through the eyes of a dog, loyal, alert, and far more perceptive than the humans around him. As viewers, we're placed in an uncomfortable position. We know something is off. Yet we're forced to watch as warnings are ignored. Every growl, every stare into the darkness feels like a plea for someone, anyone, to listen. Have you ever trusted your gut when everyone else told you to calm down? The werewolf here isn't romantic or tragic. It's raw, predatory, and terrifyingly close. There's no distant forest to hide in. No mythic ritual to soften the blow. The curse has followed its host home, creeping into domestic spaces meant to feel safe. Kitchens, bedrooms, backyards, all become potential hunting grounds. The horror hits harder because it invades the familiar. Watching this, you might find yourself glancing around your own room, suddenly aware of how thin the walls really are. What gives Bad Moon its emotional weight is the tension between love and denial. Family bonds become blindfolds. People want to believe the best, even as evidence piles up, and that reluctance to confront the truth becomes just as dangerous as the monster itself. The film quietly asks, how far would you go to protect someone you love, and when does that protection become complicity? The pacing is patient, almost cruel. Instead of constant attacks, the film feeds you moments of anticipation, a door left open, a shadow that lingers too long, a sound in the night that shouldn't be there. Each moment tightens the knot in your stomach. By the time violence erupts, it feels inevitable, like gravity finally taking over. Watching Bad Moon today, it feels like an underrated gem, stripped of glamour, focused on fear that feels personal and unavoidable. It doesn't ask you to admire the monster. It asks you to fear it, and to fear the silence that allows it to survive. So tell me, do you think Bad Moon is scarier because the threat is so close? So domestic? And if you were in that house, would you trust loyalty, or instinct? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious which side. 7. Ginger snaps. 2000, puberty hits hard, but what if the changes tearing through your body aren't metaphorical at all? And the monster growing inside you refuses to stay hidden? Would you recognize it as horror, or freedom? Ginger Snaps doesn't creep in quietly, it cuts straight to the nerves. From the opening moments, the film pulses with rebellion, blood, and dark humor, daring you to keep watching even when it feels a little too honest. This isn't just a werewolf story, it's a scream from the inside, told by girls who already feel like outsiders. As a viewer, you're pulled into their world and asked an uncomfortable question right away. Do monsters come from curses, or from growing up? Ginger and Bridget are inseparable, bound by shared alienation and a pact to reject the normal life everyone else seems desperate to embrace. Their bond feels real, messy, intense, and fragile. When Ginger is bitten, the transformation doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It unfolds gradually, disturbingly familiar. Mood swings, new urges, a sense of power that feels intoxicating. Watching it happen, you may feel a strange mix of dread and recognition. Haven't we all feared losing control during change, while secretly enjoying the rush? What makes Ginger Snaps so powerful is how it treats the werewolf myth as body horror with meaning. The blood isn't just blood. The pain isn't just pain. Every step of Ginger's change mirrors adolescence in a way that feels raw and unapologetic. The film doesn't soften it. It lets the transformation be ugly, confusing, and sometimes thrilling. And as Ginger grows stronger, Bridget grows afraid, not just of the monster, but of being left behind. Have you ever watched someone you love change so much that you barely recognized them? The suburban setting adds another layer of unease. White fences, school hallways, polite smiles, all clashing with the violence simmering underneath. The horror doesn't feel distant or mythical, it feels trapped, like something clawing its way out of a place that pretends everything is fine. The werewolf attacks shock, But it's the emotional fallout that cuts deepest. Loyalty is tested, love becomes dangerous, and denial proves fatal. By the time the film reaches its final act, Ginger Snaps stops asking for sympathy and demands honesty. It challenges you to decide what's truly terrifying: the creature Ginger becomes, or the world that never gave her room to be anything else. There's no easy moral here, only consequences. Watching it today, the film still feels sharp, rebellious, and painfully relevant. It understands that horror doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes, it grows with you. So let me ask you, do you see Ginger Snaps as a horror film, a coming-of-age story, or both? And if you were Bridget, would you try to save Ginger, or accept what she's becoming? Share your thoughts in the comments. This one hits differently for everyone. 8. The Company of Wolves, 1984. Step into a dream where fairy tales bleed into nightmares, and ask yourself this: when the wolf smiles like a man, would you still trust him? The Company of Wolves doesn't invite you into a story, it pulls you into a spell. From the first moments, reality softens at the edges, like a half-remembered dream slipping into something darker. This isn't a werewolf film that hunts you with speed or shock. It seduces you with whispers, symbols, and warnings passed down like secrets. Watching it feels less like viewing a movie and more like being told a forbidden tale late at night, when you're not sure you want to hear the ending. At its heart is Rosaline, drifting between innocence and awareness, guided by stories told by her grandmother. These stories aren't meant to comfort, they're meant to prepare. Every tale of wolves disguised as men carries a quiet lesson about desire, danger, and choice. As a viewer, you're asked to listen closely, not just to what's said, but to what's implied. How many warnings in your own life sounded like myths, until they weren't? The forest in the Company of Wolves feels alive, breathing with anticipation. Trees lean inward, shadows stretch too far, eyes gleam where no eyes should be. This is a place where instinct matters more than reason, and where curiosity can be fatal. The werewolves here aren't just beasts, they're temptations, mirrors of hunger and fear wrapped in human skin. When transformations happen, they're surreal, almost ritualistic, reminding you that becoming a monster isn't always violent, sometimes it's gradual, willing. What makes this film linger is its refusal to explain itself plainly. It trusts you to feel rather than understand. Blood becomes symbolism, fur becomes freedom, teeth become truth. Each visual choice feels intentional, like a page torn from an old book of warnings meant for those brave enough to read between the lines. And as Rosaline's journey deepens, you may find yourself questioning who truly holds power, the wolf, or the one who chooses to follow him. Unlike traditional werewolf stories driven by curses, this film is driven by awakening. It speaks to the moment when childhood safety gives way to adult awareness, when the world reveals its teeth. Watching it now, you might realize how bold it is. Even decades later, it doesn't tell you what to fear. It asks you what you want, and what that wanting might cost. By the end, the Company of Wolves leaves you unsettled, not because it scared you outright, but because it made you complicit. You listened, you followed, you understood. So let me ask you, do you see this film as a dark fairy tale, a feminist fable, or pure nightmare logic? And when faced with the wolf's smile, would you run, or step closer? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is one story that means something different to everyone. 9. Late Phases. Night of the Lone Wolf, 2014. When the darkness comes knocking every full moon. Survival depends on instinct, but what if the hunter you fear is the only one who truly understands you? Late Phases opens like a quiet farewell to the world. An aging man moves into a retirement community at the edge of nowhere, carrying war memories, fading connections, and a blindness that refuses to make him weak. From the start, you sense this isn't a typical werewolf tale. There's no frantic panic, no screaming crowds, just isolation, patience, and a man who listens to the night more carefully than anyone else. As a viewer, you're drawn into his calm defiance, wondering how long peace can last when the moon keeps its own schedule. Ambrose McKinley doesn't see the monster, he prepares for it. Every sound matters, every silence feels loaded. His world is built on routine and discipline, and that makes the threat feel sharper. Watching him, you realize how rarely horror films slow down enough to let fear breathe. The tension here doesn't rush you, it settles in your bones. Have you ever felt most afraid not in chaos, but in waiting? What makes Late Phases truly powerful is its sense of dignity. This isn't horror about helplessness. It's about experience, the kind that comes from surviving things worse than death itself. Ambrose treats the werewolf not as a legend, but as a problem to be solved, and in doing so, the film quietly flips the genre on its head. The question stops being, can he survive? And becomes, what is survival worth when you're already at the end of your road? The werewolf itself is brutal, physical, and unforgiving, but it never overshadows the human story at the center. Loss hangs heavy in every conversation. Regret lingers in the background like an unsaid confession. Ambrose's relationship with his son adds emotional weight, turning the battle against the creature into something deeply personal. It's not just about staying alive, it's about being remembered with respect. Would you fight harder to protect yourself, or to leave behind something meaningful? The setting amplifies everything. A gated community meant to feel safe becomes a trap. Friendly neighbors turn into silent victims. And the moonlight, beautiful and cruel, becomes a clock counting down to violence. Each night cycle feels ritualistic, almost sacred, as if both hunter and hunted understand the rules. There's something haunting about that mutual awareness, a sense of honor buried beneath the bloodshed. By the final act, Late Phases isn't trying to scare you, it's challenging you. It asks what it means to face fear when escape is no longer an option. Strength here isn't youth or speed, it's resolve. And that idea lingers long after the last howl fades. So tell me, did Late Phases change how you see werewolf horror? And do you think courage looks different when there's nothing left to lose? Share your thoughts in the comments. This one deserves to be talked about. 10. Howl, 2015. A routine night train grinds to a halt in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly the darkness outside feels alive. If escape wasn't an option, who would you trust when the howling begins? Howl wastes no time making you uncomfortable. From the moment the train screeches to a stop, the film traps you in a narrow metal box surrounded by endless blackness. There's something deeply unsettling about that setup. No forests to run through. No towns nearby, just rails stretching into silence. As a viewer, you're locked in with the passengers, sharing their confusion, their irritation, and eventually, their fear. You might even find yourself thinking, this could happen to me. What makes Howl work so well is its slow shift in tone. At first, the danger feels abstract, strange sounds, distant shapes, shadows brushing past the windows. People argue, form cliques, reveal small pieces of who they are. And that's when the tension starts to bite. Horror doesn't come crashing in all at once, it circles patiently, letting paranoia grow. Who steps up, who freezes, and who turns out to be someone you never expected. The werewolves here are savage and relentless. But they're not the heart of the story. The real fear comes from human behavior under pressure. Confined spaces have a way of stripping people down, exposing fear, courage, selfishness, and sacrifice in equal measure. As the night stretches on, survival becomes a shared responsibility and a dangerous gamble. Watching this, you might ask yourself, would I help the group, or protect myself first? Joe Griffin, an unlikely protagonist, carries the emotional core of the film. He isn't brave in the traditional sense. He doubts himself, hesitates, second guesses every choice, and that's exactly why he feels real. His growth doesn't come from hero speeches or sudden strength, it comes from fear, mistakes, and the decision to act anyway. In those moments, Howl reminds us that courage often shows up late, shaking, but determined. The setting amplifies everything. Flickering lights, rattling metal, narrow corridors. Each space becomes a battleground. Every door feels fragile. Every window feels like a mistake. When the attacks come, they're fast, brutal, and unforgiving, but never mindless. The creatures feel intelligent, coordinated, almost cruel in their patience. You're left constantly waiting for the next strike, bracing yourself with each passing second. What lingers after Howl ends isn't just the violence, it's the exhaustion. The sense of having endured something together. The film asks a quiet but powerful question. when stripped of comfort and certainty? Who do we become? So let me ask you, does Howl scare you more because of the monsters outside, or the fragile humanity trapped inside that train? And if you were on board, would you lead, follow, or hide? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what choice you think you'd make. As the last howl fades into the night, you're left with more than monsters, you're left with questions. These films didn't just show werewolves chasing victims, they showed fear living inside homes, cities, families, and even ourselves. Maybe that's why they stay with us long after the moon sets. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these stories crawled under your skin the deepest? And which one would you add to this list? If you enjoyed walking through the shadows with me, like the video, share it with fellow horror fans, and subscribe for more journeys into classic terror.